Hello, my name is Sophia. In the past 3 years, the numerous mass shootings that happen on American school campuses have brought the issue of trauma experienced by American students to the nation's attention. What is rarely discussed is the constant trauma experienced by inner city students.
Ready? Camera rolling.
Sound?
Sound rolling.
Miss Grace, interview, take one.
Hi, hello. How is discrimination towards students identified and handled in school?
Well, my students
Okay. Cynthia, 1 and 2, please.
are sometimes carrying a heavy burden of the prejudices or the violence that they've experienced in their families, their communities, the streets, from each other sometimes, from authority.
They're not people, these are animals.
Many of my students belong to marginalized populations.
You know, we support those nationalist principles like closing the borders.
They are attacked both publicly and privately in the media, from politicians, from legislation, anywhere all the way down to just amongst even each other.
Our journalism class turned our cameras on our educators and peers to find the answer to one burning question. What is the effect of trauma on inner city education?
Well, my definition of trauma is experiences or adverse experiences that anyone can go through in life that causes them to change their behavior, emotion, anything that keeps them from being able to carry on their normal lives.
It's an uncontrolled event that happens that dictates a lot of what happens in your life.
And I believe that as a community, as a culture within this community, whether it's the African American community or the Latino community, we don't talk enough about that with our kids.
23% of students have said that they strongly disagree and somewhat disagree that it's okay for a person who was born a boy to decide later on in life to become a girl.
Person one, the person in power, the person with authority in society.
My name is Grace McCullough. I'm a high school teacher at Communication and Technology School at Diego Rivera.
Have you ever seen a student at CATS get bullied for their sexuality?
I don't know that I've seen explicit bullying at CATS. I have heard students say like, "Oh, you're so gay, that's so gay, he's gay, miss." And I just always say, "Gay's okay. Gay's okay, what's the big deal?"
This year, I've had to deal with two parents that came to me and talked to me that they felt that their son was gay and that they didn't want to have it. And so that it's been quite a challenge, you know, with these particular parents.
Since the election of Donald Trump, there has been an increase of hate crimes against the LGBT community. The Trevor Project, one of the nation's leading crisis intervention centers that provides suicide prevention services to the LGBT community, report that there was a 17.6% jump in calls within 24 hours of the President Trump's tweet regarding transgender military service.
And today, more than 1 in 4 transgender people have been assaulted because of their identity, according to the National Center for Transgender Equality.
So you have kids whose parents don't want to accept them, you know, and that can be traumatizing, obviously.
Okay. Can you please state your name, the school you attend, and what grade you're in?
My name is John Ramirez, and you guys can call me Julia, and the school I attend is Diego Rivera CATS.
The LGBT community happens to be one of the ones who are most at risk.
I consider myself an ally to the LGBTQ community. I believe it's a spectrum. I believe that those identities are fluid.
Although I think as a nation we've done a lot, but in this particular community, you know, you have the Latino culture, African American culture, where that is just, you know, you can get kicked out of the family.
Julia's situation is different than many in her community. Her mother and father are very supportive, but not everyone feels the same way.
Were you ever discriminated for your sexuality?
I know this day so well. June 30th, it was during summer. I got into an argument with a neighbor. Her name was Debbie. Well, actually, the argument didn't involve me at first. The argument was between my mom and her. And so, like, you know, I butted in. And she came at me, and then she said that it was none of my business, that she said that I'm a little bitch. She told me that she would call her son to get me. She told me that I did not know what I like between penises and vaginas. And she said that very out loud, so I'm pretty sure the neighbors heard.
Can you tell us why it's important to you to be an ally to the LGBTQ community?
So my uncle was gay, but I really didn't know that growing up. Later in life, after he passed away, I learned that a lot of my family didn't really accept him because we're Catholic. So it's very important to me to try to help people feel accepted and loved, because I think everyone deserves to feel loved and safe no matter what.
If students aren't feeling safe and comfortable, it's more challenging for them to learn what we're teaching.
Then when they come to class to learn, instead of focusing on what they're supposed to be doing, which is reading, writing, or learning math, English, social studies, they're thinking about whatever's happening at home.
How do you feel knowing that the LGBTQ people are always being targeted?
I feel like they should know that they're gonna have to grow a backbone, that they're not gonna make everybody happy, that of course you're gonna get comments like what Debbie said. Like, you're gonna have to be prepared for when like stuff like that happens. And so like I feel like they need to be ready, they need to be like cool, keep their cool, and be prepared.
But how does one prepare for the constant barrage of negative images from the press, entertainment media, and images just outside your door?
Unfortunately, a lot of my students experienced chronic trauma, which is more of a daily experience of violence or fear. And for some of them, it's where they live, or maybe there's a gang presence in that area. For some of them, it's experiences with the police.
Police killings are cutting the lives of more people of color. Police violence negatively impacts young people. It's a serious problem for Americans who are repeatedly assaulted and murdered by intrusive police officers.
Action 3, 2.
Good afternoon, my name is Juan Arshate.
Hi, good afternoon, my name is Mr. Romo.
Have you experienced any racial profiling?
I want to say more growing up. I was into like fixing cars. So I remember a lot of the times I would just be driving and then police will stop me just because they saw fixed up car, nice car. They would pull me over and ask for my driver's license, ask for everything. I'll be in my staff shirt. And then once they saw that my record was clean, that I was good, they would let me go. But it would happen various times.
In the inner city, particularly here in South Los Angeles, there are so many risk factors for students that it's a high needs city just from that perspective.
In 2017, LAUSD screened 2,500 of its students. 40% reported not feeling safe, and 26% were at high risk for traumatic stress.
And there's a lot of research showing that that a lot of urban youth are facing similar symptoms to what soldiers in war are facing with PTSD.
I have many students who have experienced trauma and shared it with me from my first year of teaching to today.
Students can feel depression, anxiety, fear, and all of these things can hinder their learning.
They're bringing that into the classroom, so then kids start falling behind in their ability to read.
Any young person or adult that's going through a lot of trauma in their life, whether it's through gun violence, sexual violence, family, domestic abuse, unstable home life, that kind of trauma will negatively impact their ability to focus at school.
And at the high school level, we see that most of our kids are reading at like 5th grade level, if that, 4th grade level, 6th grade level. Sometimes, we'll get kids at grade level is like really rare, but it's all of these experiences that have kept them from being able to focus on learning.
Many of us go through our day unaware that the situations we face beyond the walls of our school contribute to our stress.
From the perspective of a young person stepping out of my role as a counselor, there's drugs that are very easily accessible, and not just pot, but the big drugs as well, like meth and cocaine. And now the added fentanyl one as well. There is poverty. So all you need to do is step outside of the school and you see, a bunch of RVs where some of our students live, and some of them even have like chronic absenteeism or tardiness because they don't want to be seen coming out of those places. You have gangs that you have to kind of deal with as a young person.
We see gangs taking a toll in inner cities instead of the community responding to their youth. It's gangs that reach out to them in hopes of recruiting them.
I grew up in Boyle Heights. Boyle Heights is a creative neighborhood with over 32 gangs. And when I think of gangs, the images that come to mind are guns, drugs, knives. And growing up in that community, in Boyle Heights, and even growing up in Echo Park, gangs were a big influence.
I walk to school every morning. I don't know what's going around and if there's gang violence, because LA is known for gang violence. So you never know what is going around, and you could possibly just be standing there and just get shot just for being in the middle of a situation.
I grew up pretty much across the street. My family moved out here when I was about 4 years old. So this was about 1989. You know, drive-bys were normal. They were something new that was happening. We saw it in movies. We heard it over the news. Tires screeching, gunshots, people screaming, and everyone hiding.
The culture of violence in South LA is legendary and has impacted generations.
February 2019, the Los Angeles Times published a series, Surrounded. It investigated the violence surrounding Los Angeles City schools and the impact it has on students. The class reached out to Sonali Kohli, one of the series writers, to discuss what she found.
My name is Sonali Kohli, and I'm a reporter for the Los Angeles Times. I started working on this series with one of my colleagues, and it was about the public high schools in Los Angeles County that are surrounded by the highest number of homicides. So the schools that have the most people killed nearby within a mile of campus. And what we wanted to do was understand first, like, what are these schools, where are they, and then what are the ways that students and also faculty and families are affected. The area that we found that seemed to be most impacted was kind of clustered around the 110 freeway in South LA between the 10 and the 105 freeways farther down in the southern part. Those were the areas where the most homicides were happening near schools.
Our school, the Communication and Technology School at the Diego Rivera Learning Complex, is located right in the middle of the most impacted zone. While the school campuses in these areas are relatively safe, the areas surrounding experience high levels of violence and crime.
Some studies just came out that this year, this 2018, was the worst in terms of school shootings.
Yet another American town became the site of yet another deadly school shooting.
School shootings have become a major issue in our school system, from large massacres to one-on-one shooting events.
Do you know, is your daughter safe?
So when we talk about trauma and how students are impacted by trauma, usually we talk about within the scope of a school shooting.
Can you describe your reaction and thoughts on the school shooting that occurred in Florida?
Tragic. It goes beyond just saying thoughts and prayers like you hear. I remember vividly when Columbine happened.
Columbine High in Littleton, Colorado. It has been a horror.
1999, 2 high school students went on a deadly rampage, and the images seared themselves into the nation's collective memory.
I was in school, and it kind of like stopped the earth.
We haven't had a school shooting in this particular school, but we have had a slew of shootings outside of the school, you know, in the community, where we've had even former students who have been killed. And so that obviously affects that sense of safety.
It'll also affect your mental health. Growing up with all that anxiety and affect your brain development and affect your growth as a young man or a young woman, and the ability to grow up healthy.
Have you had any experiences with gun violence?
Yes. When I was in high school, my brother died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head.
Did it traumatize you?
Absolutely. It was very traumatizing because it's one thing to like see it on TV and like hear about it, but it's another thing to deal with the aftermath of a gunshot victim. Gun violence is so permanent. It's not like a fist fight or something like that. If someone dies, they're dead, and it's violent and it's gruesome. So yeah, it created a considerable amount of trauma in my life.
Just this semester alone, we have had, at the very least, between 10 to 15 cases of suicide ideation. So suicide ideation in students are any thoughts of harming themselves.
The Journal of American Medical Association reports that the United States have seen a steady rise in teen suicide since 2000, with 2017 seeing the highest rate since the government started collecting the statistics in 1960. In addition to this, there are still other issues inner city students must face.
You have gangs that you have to kind of deal with as a young person.
One day I was walking home with a friend, and there was some kid walking in front of me. All I noticed that he had a colorful backpack, and he eventually crossed the street, and there was a white car that suddenly pulled up, and I heard what sounded like fireworks, and I thought maybe he has fireworks and he's just messing with them over there. But when I looked inside the car, the passenger of that white car had a gun, and he was shooting at the kid, and the kid ran back into a house, which was my friend's, and if that person did not cross the street, me and my friend could have gotten shot. And there was a person in a car. He was like, his car seat was all the way back, so he missed getting shot by like a few, and it was just like, ever since that happened, I would always, whenever I see a white car, I get scared because I don't know what would happen. I think like, oh, what if they know me, or like, why were they going after that kid or something like that?
You know, I really don't think that any student, K through 12 or even in college, shouldn't see this as normal. You know, something they grew up in, and they hear about something and they just another one, another week, another weekend, another month.
In middle school, you know, I've had, you know, classmates killed in drive-bys. You can't ignore it. You know, you get used to gunshots. But the one thing you can never get used to is the pain.
There's a lot of students who exhibit post-traumatic stress symptoms. I can't like diagnose PTSD, but like those symptoms include things like anxiety or depression or being hypervigilant. So when you hear a helicopter nearby or an ambulance, you like start a little bit, or that happens so much that you become numb to it and you just don't care.
Trauma affects everyone differently. Some individuals may clearly display PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder.
Well, if you know your parents are getting evicted, if you know your parents don't have enough money to buy food, then you're gonna have a hard time, one, coming to school regularly, second, learning, and concentrating.
Chronic stress is a long-term form of stress that comes from many factors. Among those are feelings of despair or hopelessness, family dysfunctions, traumatic early childhood experiences, and poverty, conditions that are all too common in the inner cities.
I've taught in this community for 4 years, and majority of my classrooms are Latino students and African American students. I usually teach about 95 to 98% Latino students, and then 2 to 5% African American students. All of the students I've taught in my 6 years of teaching have been low-income students.
Poverty is huge. We offer a meal program here, obviously, and we have had cases in which students only come to eat, and then they leave. They'll jump the fence, or they'll find some way to get out.
Trauma and the effects of trauma has a profound impact on our education, but it's something we don't talk about in our communities. The factors that contribute to trauma, like racial and gender discrimination, gun violence, police brutality, and poverty, are often not addressed. It's our job to ask the questions of our leaders, our parents, and our educators.
As the principal of the Communication and Technology School, how would you help a student overcome trauma?
Well, we try to provide as much support as possible, so all the adults, I think, in the office could feel, or I hope they would feel, that they could come and talk to us. We spend the entire day almost talking to students?
I think people talk a lot about the stigma against getting mental health resources, but when I was reporting, like most of the family, like most of the parents I talked to knew that there were mental health resources and that their kids could get them or that they could, and they weren't like super against it.
I consider myself a trauma-informed educator, and I try to approach my students with that mentality to support them through their trauma. So it's both preventative and reactionary to their needs.
One of the things that we have been very intentional about is creating a culture of respect. And I think that's one of the first things that needs to happen in a trauma-informed school.
Our school attempts to communicate about trauma by teaching lessons in advisory and trying to do restorative justice circles and encourage strong relationships between students and adults so that they will feel comfortable to share their stories.
And what's nice about it is that I think we've created an environment where kids know they can come and share things with us. What's hard about it is that a lot of our time, because we have so many kids experiencing trauma, a lot of our time's consumed with talking to kids about their trauma.
Seek help where you can find it, whether it's your family, whether it's a teacher, whether it's a support group, whatever it may be.
That family environment that's very much needed. And one of the things that I know that we need to do, that we need to work on, is getting more parent involvement. And that has been a very difficult thing to do. It's just getting the parents to come in and then working with the parents.
One of the nation's leading crisis intervention centers that provide suicide prevention services to the LGBT community report that there was a 17.6% jump in calls. I said it.
The culture of violence in South LA is legendary and has impacted. Why?
Because you didn't say
I
legendary,
know,
right?
I know.
Legendary.
Ready? Hold on.
RSQ.
Cute.